Do I belong here? It always feels like an emotional question, and it was simply an emotional question for a really long time until I started having to ask a much more complicated question like, can I belong here? I used to live in a body that could take these arms and pick up both of my sons when they were 4 and put both of them, one on each hip, and dance around joyfully. Until the civil war between my immune system and the part of my body that allowed bones and joints to bend and move broke and took away all of the cartilage and the bones, and my fingers and wrist and elbows broke so much that they fused together. These feet, well, the one and the other that used to be there, this not foot, used to be strong enough to take me up 500-foot cliffs and collect fossils as a paleontologist for the National Park Service. Then they became the feet that people could hear breaking against each other as I would walk up a flight of stairs, and then when told to rest and sit down and relax and take it easy, they were feet and ankles that fused into deformed shapes that strangled tendons and ligaments and friendships and hopes and dreams. Can I belong here became a much more complicated question. And as the Civil War raged, threatening things that moved, like my eyes looking right or left, or my heart beating, or my lungs expanding, I had to negotiate a lot of peace treaties between me versus me. And one of those peace treaties was something like this. Dear body, you are attacking me, and I experience a tremendous amount of pain, and I break no matter what I do. And so I have decided that I am going to do exactly what I want to do, so I have something great to explain why I am limping, why that is broken, why that part doesn't work again. So one of these parts of my life where I was able to negotiate this peace treaty and just live on anyway led me to getting to be an education specialist at Yellowstone National Park. And one of the main projects that I was in charge of was shadowing a myriad of scientific researchers within the park that were looking at how was the ecosystem reacting to the reintroduction of wolves 10 years later? Now, 80 years before I worked at the park, people had intentionally extirpated a species from its community. They had exiled the wolves because they were deemed as too costly, too negative. They killed stuff, and that was bad. And so they weren't endangered, they weren't extinct, they were just removed. And here I was, 10 years after they had been returned, mainly because the elk population was too big, and so that became a different costly problem. And this one day that I keep coming back to as I make choices like, can I belong here, is one where I sat down on the bank of the Yellowstone River where a tributary fed into it with a wildlife biologist whose specialty was grizzly bears. And he will not stop talking about, not grizzly bears, but the clarity of the water. And I'm like, buddy, we have hiked 12 miles, we have come to the stream, we have done 3 hours of water collection, and you have not talked about bears at all. nor wolves, and that is my project, and your project is bears, so like, can we just, focus? And I'm like, what does the water clarity have to do with bears and wolves? And he looks at me kind of audaciously and is like, everything. And he can see the blankness on my face, and he's like, look, as we're in this valley, this is so different than before the wolves were back. Because see that herd of elk in that valley? Those elk are being moved constantly as the wolves hunt them. And therefore, they don't camp out in these river banks. And when they don't camp out here, the willow is allowed to thrive enough that its roots form this mat that holds the ground together. And that keeps the streams clear. And when the streams are clear, then the cutthroat trout flourish. And bears, grizzly bears, need cutthroat trout. So I get to start my next big project, which is delisting grizzly bears from the Endangered Species Act. And it was my first exposure in a non-academic setting of the impact of a keystone species and what a trophic cascade and a trophic collapse all really meant. And I'm at a point where recently a peace treaty has ended. I am at a point where that treaty's end leaves me feeling exiled. The loss of another body part, a series of additional surgeries and repairs to re-repair what was repaired, and explanations. This time, it's not because of the disease. It's because, as a science teacher, fuss duty was really important. And as I worked with a few other teachers to herd about 500 moving middle schoolers onto buses in the afternoon, my right prosthetic leg was stepped on a backpack. And I didn't know until the ground moved underneath me and I fell with an outstretched arm that had an artificial elbow that shattered through the bones in my arm. And I trashed the remainder of what was of my right leg. And through all of this, every night I go to bed and I just think I don't belong anywhere. I can't be anywhere without being a burden, without being in the way. How do I do this? And yet I keep remembering that once upon a time, a group of people made a very unpopular, costly decision to return wolves from exile. And the benefits were compoundingly astounding. And I can't help but wonder, one day will our communities decide that the protection of bodies like mine through access and accessibility and accommodations, that cost will be much less than the benefit of people like me getting access to belonging.